Christopher Nolan, British and American filmmaker known to be one of the greatest to ever do it. Right off the bat, I'd say that this is a huge jump from my last two directorial rankings. Nolan being as respected and successful as he is puts this pressure on me that I hadn't really felt while making my other two ranking videos. Not to discredit Edgar Wright or Wong Kar-wai in any way, really good directors in their own right. But Christopher Nolan, man, the mind behind so many clever and epic films, ranking his work feels like an impossible task. I love how grand and special his films feel. You're so immersed in the worlds and the calculated narratives that he creates, you completely disregard the nearly 3-hour runtimes for some of his films. Everything about a Nolan film feels spectacular, and his alma mater being the university I go to automatically increases my respect for him. The course I'm studying probably wouldn't exist without this man's impact. What I find so refreshing about Nolan's films is that they're truly an experience. You take a lot away from watching one of his films. They make you question all sorts of things, and normally I find that kind of existentialism tacky and hard to pull off, but Nolan makes it look easy. I don't even want to be that typical film bro who overly glazes Nolan, but give him his flowers because there's no way you can deny this guy's influence. This is also kind of the reason why when the whole Barbenheimer discourse was going around last year, I never really took it seriously because beyond cultural impact, Oppenheimer overshadows Barbie in every way. Sorry to any Barbie fans out there, I just felt that it kind of missed the mark, really badly. But that's a whole other can of worms I probably shouldn't get into right now. My point is there's a very high standard when it comes to a Nolan film, and he seems to meet or even exceed it every single time. Like I said with the Edgar Wright video, this one will probably be outdated in the next few years because by that time Nolan will probably have released his next feature length, but I couldn't contain myself. I really wanted to share my love for Nolan's filmography, and there's no better way to do that than through a ranking video. But before I get into that, I would really like to thank you all for your overwhelming support for this channel. I know it's only been a couple of months since I started uploading, but I'm so incredibly happy with the growth we've made in this time, and that's all thanks to you. And if you haven't seen me before, and you do enjoy these kinds of videos, maybe consider subscribing because it helps out a lot more than you'd know. All that being said, let's get into the ranking. Oh, and also spoiler warning in case you haven't seen these films before, but you all probably have, let's be real. Now, by no means do I hate this film. In fact, I quite enjoyed it for what it was, but it seems that a lot of people hate this movie, and I mean hate it, and while I don't feel as strongly about it, I can kind of get where they are coming from. At number 12, I've put Tenet. This film is confusing and a little all over the place, and while I can say that that's the charm of it for me, I can't deny that it kind of misses the mark. I think this is easily Nolan's most experimental film, and hey, I love me some risk-taking, but even though I didn't really understand what was going on, I didn't really care to figure it out either. I mean, it was a fun experience, but what this film sets out to do has already been achieved by Nolan in the past, in titles like Inception and Memento, and those films did it way better. Also, I can't believe that I haven't even mentioned Hans Zimmer once in this video. His scores are kind of integral to what make a good Nolan film, and he isn't present here. His absence is very obvious, and it is a bit of a shame because I feel like his magic could have elevated some of the scenes for me. Instead, we got a soundtrack that is so loud you can just about make out about half the dialogue. Maybe watching in IMAX would be the most ideal way to watch, but of course I don't have that option. By the way, speaking of IMAX, I'll probably never be able to get used to the sudden changes in aspect ratio, but I guess that's just a Nolan staple now. The acting definitely carries this film for me. John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, and Elizabeth Debicki were all perfect for their roles. Debicki specifically, who didn't really have much to work with, which ties into a common critique I've heard about Nolan films. Women aren't exactly written the best, and this is true for Tenet with a character like Kat, who is very bare bones, and to be fair, I feel like this is the case for the rest of the characters too. I'm not too sure I'm a big fan of the main character being unnamed, but that might just be me. There are some really cool action sequences, and the whole time twisting concept wasn't as confusing as I remembered, but again, I just couldn't really bring myself to care for it all, and the film doesn't make me care either. The titles I mentioned earlier, Memento and Inception. Memento, even without telling the story backwards, is a pretty compelling thriller. The gimmick adds to it. Inception's dream in a dream plot and world is so well developed, there's so much to sink your teeth into. But then there's Tenet, which despite its backwards moving gimmickry has a fairly plain linear story about preventing a catastrophe. As nitpicky as I'm sounding though, I am happy this film is in Nolan's filmography. I love when directors do whatever they want to do, and while Tenet isn't exactly the most perfectly executed film out there, it was still a fun watch, and I definitely consider rewatching it sometime in the future. This is the only real time I felt that Nolan has missed, by the way. I'll be a little more positive from this point on. I'm a little gutted that I've had to put this film so low, because honestly this is a really good film for a directorial debut, but considering how Nolan has outdone himself in every title since, with the exception of Tenet, I've had to place this second to last. The following is a phenomenal film with what Nolan had to work with, considering his £6,000 budget and difficult filming schedule. This is Nolan in his rawest form, I feel like, considering his quick rise to fame and swift move to Hollywood, with his next feature being Memento. We never really see this side of him again, and that's what makes this film so special. This film was exclusively shot in a few areas in London where of course Nolan grew up and studied, and that close to home feeling adds such a personal touch. From a production standpoint, I can resonate with this film. Even though I've never really made a film with a budget as high as this, just a couple of student ones here and there with uni, the very limited locations and use of available light is something I can relate to. The struggles of 1. Scouting locations and 2. Getting permission from them is one I've personally been through, and to see my all-time favourite director having been through that exact thing is a nice feeling. I mentioned this a little bit in my Edgar Wright video that I love directorial debuts for the reason of seeing the roots of really talented and successful people and how they got their start, and the following is a prime example of that. The DNA to what makes a good Nolan film is all here. The non-linear plot structure, the themes of duality, the twists, all screwing with your head in the best possible way. Like I said, it is a shame I've had to put this so low, but honestly, if Nolan revisited this film, or had a bigger budget available at the time, allowing to develop the story more with a longer runtime, this could have the potential to be among some of his top films. I do really recommend this one. You'd enjoy it a lot more than you'd think. At number 10, I've placed Insomnia. When I first watched it, I had no idea it was a remake of a Norwegian film released a few years earlier, and I still haven't seen the original. I'm not sure how much Nolan changed, but judging the film on its own merits, I think it's pretty solid. Naturally, this feels like the least Nolan film out there, being a remake with Nolan solely credited as director, without his usual roles as writer or producer. The narrative is linear with no major twists, and what you know, it features a well-written female character. Despite these differences, I think what Nolan achieved here is really good, making it an underrated outlier in his filmography. This dark psychological thriller is set in Alaska, a perfect backdrop for the story. The themes of guilt and morality are well executed, following Detective Will Dormer, played by Al Pacino. Dormer is determined to solve the murder of a young woman, but accidentally shoots his partner and, in his shame, tries to cover it up. He suffers from extreme insomnia as a result, which is made worse by the perpetual daylight in Alaska. The murderer, Walter Finch, played by Robin Williams, witnesses the incident and tries to undermine Dormer's credibility with the police. The plot is straightforward and neither intense nor suspenseful, but instead lures you into a state of tranquility with its calm approach to the crime genre, which is really engaging, and I can appreciate that. Despite Nolan minimizing his stylistic flourishes, Insomnia remains an effective crime thriller. Al Pacino is fantastic as Will Dormer, whose character grows more intriguing as he questions himself and his mental state. However, Robin Williams' character is the highlight for me. Robin Williams, man, absolutely killed every role he was in, and Insomnia is no exception to this. He's brilliant, fascinating, and at times evokes sympathy despite his actions. This complexity makes the conclusion both frustrating and compelling, leaving me eager to see what happens next. While this may not be Nolan's strongest film, I still thoroughly enjoyed it for its dark undertones. For his third ever film, it is very impressive. So at number 9, I've put The Dark Knight Rises, which is the third installment of the Dark Knight trilogy, and similar to Tenet, a lot of people feel very strongly about their hate for this film, and I'm just here thinking it wasn't that bad. I felt that this film wrapped up everything really nicely, and while yes, this is a very obvious downgrade from its predecessor, there's a camp appeal to this film. This movie is very stupid. A lot of things don't make sense, you can never really take Bane seriously. Talia al Ghul is a character that had no real reason or motivation to exist. For a Batman film, there isn't really much Batman at all, but for some reason, I don't mind any of this. For whatever reason, I have a soft spot for this movie. It's just fun. This movie feels the most comic book-like of the three, which works in some places but muddles the tone in others. I try not to be too critical of comic book movie plots, but given that this is Christopher Nolan, there are some questionable moments. The most glaring is when every single police officer gets trapped in the sewers, which is just incredibly unrealistic. Bane's abrupt death also bothers me a little bit. However, despite these major flaws, I get a lot of enjoyment out of this movie. I absolutely adore Tom Hardy as Bane. Despite his goofy voice, I liked him as the antagonist, and he has some great quotes. Anne Hathaway's Catwoman also has some really slick moments. There are also some sequences in this film that are just amazing. The opening action on the plane, Bane and Batman's first encounter, Bruce escaping the prison, and the chaos during the final act. The score is superb, the pacing isn't terrible, the cinematography is outstanding, and the ending is really nice. While it may not be Nolan's best work, I love this silly movie for what it is. I also really enjoyed the ending where Blake is revealed to be Robin, teasing a spin-off that will never happen. It just felt like a very Nolan thing to do. Well, one can dream. Also, were we really supposed to believe that Joey King was a boy? Dunkirk is at the number 8 spot, and visually it's one of Nolan's best works. I'm not sure what the general opinion on this film is, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. This is normally not my type of film, but I think with Hans Zimmer's exceptional score and Nolan's direction, I'm very captivated by this film. One thing I will say though is that it does kind of fall short in terms of emotion, with the characters seeming a little hollow. While the film does emphasize human desperation and survival, it feels like there's something missing. I appreciate the portrayal of the raw terror of an unseen enemy attacking from all sides, but the film could have benefited if the characters weren't just used as mere vessels. I also think that the mixing might be an issue with this film, similar to Tenet, but again that might just be an IMAX thing. But I would say that these are very minor gripes. I feel like I just need to keep in mind that this film isn't going for something super character driven like Saving Private Ryan. This film tries to bring you into the real life historical event of the Dunkirk evacuation and draws attention into the grim and unpredictable nature of war. As you might expect from a Nolan movie, the narrative structure is non-linear and essentially tells 3 stories: in the air, in the sea, and on land. These take place over an hour, a day, and a week respectively, and are intertwined throughout the movie. I love the Nolan charm to this movie, and it's what makes it unique and special. I think overall this film does what it set out to do, and I love that Nolan isn't afraid to try something different. I don't really have much else to say. Cinematically a really good film and a pretty damn intense experience. Also, I still can't get over how bizarre it is that Harry Styles is in this film. He just looks so out of place. At number 7, I've put Batman Begins, the first installment of the Dark Knight trilogy. For some reason, I knew that I wanted to put this over the previous films in this list, but when it came to formulating my thoughts, I was kind of stumped and I'm not too sure why. I quite like this film, but there isn't really much else to say about it. It doesn't help that this film seems to be the most forgotten about in terms of Nolan's filmography, but also in terms of the trilogy it's a part of, considering The Dark Knight overshadows this film in every way, and of course The Dark Knight Rises is in more recent memory for people, and also it's a fun film to knock on. But this film is underrated because it's the one that started it all. For Nolan, going the superhero route was a risky move. He hadn't attempted something so huge before, and it seemed he was cut out for it because it paid off. This was a big breakthrough for him, and it makes perfect sense why, because everything just works. Christian Bale as Bruce Wayne and Michael Caine as Alfred couldn't have been more perfect. Cillian Murphy plays a great villain as Scarecrow, and the whole Ra's al Ghul plot was really well done with a twist. What's not to like here? Origin stories in comic book films are so fun because you get to see the hero's humble beginnings and them not really fitting into this superhero role just yet, and this film does a great job of showing that. Pretty solid film, and I absolutely love how Nolan teases the Joker for the next film. At number 6 is Inception, and this is peak Nolan. This movie is insane, and I still have no idea how the hell he's pulled this off. I really just want to dissect this guy's mind because the way he packaged these metaphysical elements and concepts of dreaming into a complex yet detailed and digestible film needs to be studied. Nolan is so good at doing these out of left field risky concepts and exploring them in a way that works with the rules of reality, making us think of the possibilities of this stuff actually happening. Where do I even start? The visuals are phenomenal. I'm a huge sucker for practical effects because I love it when directors don't do the cheap route, and this film is a prime example of that, where you have rotating rooms and all this other hands-on tech to create such an immersive experience. Nolan somehow knows exactly what I want as a viewer, and he just delivers. This is such a special film, and I really wish that we got more films that are as ambitious and pay off like this one. As someone who was really into the whole concept of dreaming, lucid dreaming specifically, this film was right up my alley. I loved how some concepts were explored in this film, like the idea of planting ideas in a mind, or how every face you know in a dream is someone you know in real life. I also loved that some of this film was shot in my uni. Nolan and his wife Emma Thomas revisiting their roots and acknowledging London from time to time is always a good feeling. I do kind of wonder how people felt when Leo DiCaprio was casually on campus. Anyway, I love how the stakes get more and more increased and the heist starts getting harder to pull off. You're so invested in this film, it's impossible to not care about what's going on. You're hooked the entire way through, and the Hans Zimmer score is so damn good. I love that there's an ambiguous ending for whatever reason. I don't really see how the top wouldn't fall over, but the question of if it did or if it didn't is such a nice added touch that makes you question this movie way more than you already have. The backstory of Cobb and his wife is really dramatic but emotional and works for the narrative. It reinforces the negatives of a concept like dream sharing and doesn't feel out of place, making you really root and connect with the character. I loved how Nolan tackled the concept of time feeling like years in a dream, which I've personally felt myself. I love the concept of totems, which is similar to reality checks while you're lucid dreaming, like having extra fingers or being able to push your finger through your palm to know that you're dreaming. I love that that's explored and utilized in this story. You've probably noticed that I've said I loved a lot in this segment alone, which just goes to show how brilliant and genius this movie is, and it isn't even in the top 5, which is the craziest part. So yeah, banger film, and I really am hoping Nolan's next project is something as crazy as this one. Not Tenet crazy though. I don't know how everyone will feel about the placement of this film, but I've put Oppenheimer at number 5. Aside from being the next installment in Nolan's filmography, Oppenheimer was massively popular when it was released due to the Barbenheimer craze. Everyone was rushing to watch both films on their premiere, and it made perfect sense why. Two huge films with absolutely stacked casts and strong hooks. The hype was there, and wouldn't you know, Oppenheimer lived up to that hype. Let's get this out of the way, Cillian Murphy is amazing in this movie. Don't get me wrong, every other role he's had, including those in past Nolan entries, he's absolutely killed it. But Oppenheimer is really when they let him shine, and his performance is just mesmerizing. I will say that the film is slightly long. And I can definitely sit through a long film, it just doesn't engage you the whole way through like Inception does, but I still think that this film does so many things well to put it at a solid number 5. The film is an experience that you have to watch from beginning to end to grasp it all. The tone of ambivalence, but also the thrill of invention in the first 2/3 of this film gradually shifts and explodes, pun intended, into an air of guilt and paranoia. The sense of terror from the whole "what have I done" is hard hitting, and seeing Oppie's decline into an emotional wreck perfectly captivates this. Oppenheimer having hallucinations and just looking absolutely soulless is so powerful. I don't even know how I'm able to string together a coherent sentence about this film. It's just that good. In typical Nolan fashion, there is the mixing of past and future thanks to the editing, toying with time to a powerful third act. Ludwig Göransson's soundtrack is impressive. Cillian Murphy is, again, perfect. And Robert Downey Jr. soars surprisingly more than expected. To me, this is more than just a biopic of Oppenheimer's life. It's an epic political thriller that borders on genuine terror. A bit of a slow burner, sure, but with authentic feeling, intelligent dialogue, and stunning visuals, this will go down as one of the best films of this decade, and one of the biggest highlights in Nolan's filmography. And let's just take a moment to appreciate that absolutely chilling Trinity test scene. Like seriously, that shockwave from the blast can be felt dangerously close to home. Ultimately, Oppenheimer is a monumental achievement that transcends its genre, leaving a lasting impression with its powerful performances, intricate storytelling, and unforgettable visuals, cementing its status as a modern classic in Nolan's filmography and opens the door for more ambitious ventures. This was tough, and I did feel for a while that I might have placed this a little higher than I should have, but after skimming this film again, I made the correct choice putting this at number 4. The Prestige is one of those films that probably couldn't have been done by any other director. Nolan breathes life into a concept like this, and man is it an investing one. Non-linear storytelling is clearly Nolan's forte, and this film, like his other films, does a damn good job in telling its story. It's so intricate and full of character depth. The cat and mouse nature, mixed with characters who just want to be the best at what they do, provide for a story that brings non-stop thrills. Knowing all of the twists, it's so interesting to see all of these seeds planted throughout the film. The interactions between Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale are incredible. Hugh Jackman's character's drive, you end up rooting for him for a good majority of this film until it's revealed how he actually ends up doing his iteration of the transported man. You know, killing a clone every single time. It's in a weird moral grey area where yes, it's very messed up, but the true him is technically still alive and he of course gives himself consent to do it. It screws with your head a bit. But the way he gets to this point is really disgusting, and having Christian Bale get the last laugh in the end is really refreshing, seeing how badly he gets treated throughout this movie. Or should I say they, considering he was part of a pair of twins this whole time. David Bowie playing Nikola Tesla was just really random, but I love that he does. Scarlett Johansson was very poorly written, I will get that out of the way, but her inclusion, or lack thereof, doesn't really contribute to the overarching story that much, so it's kind of a minor gripe that doesn't really take away from the positive things I have to say about this film. There are certainly mysteries to unwrap upon first viewing, but watching through it again, armed with foreknowledge, does so much more than tickle the "oh, so that's why so and so did such and such" part of your brain. In fact, you could argue that you only truly understand the characters, their motivations, and the emotional journeys they take when you know all of the secrets that the film has been hiding in plain sight. Like the actual twist itself, where it's revealed that Christian Bale performed the transported man because his twin was in on it. It's not even anticlimactic because despite it being so obvious, I didn't even expect it upon first viewing. It genuinely took me by surprise, and I love that. The final dialogue between the two magicians is just so powerful, and that final shot showing all of the dead Andreas in the tanks is so haunting and goes to show the risks he took just to pull off this trick. This film is a blast to watch and seems to get better every time you rewatch it. I do truly miss the times you could understand what the characters were saying in a Nolan film. At number 3 we have The Dark Knight. It was obvious this was going to be high up on this list, let's be real. What is there to say about this movie that hasn't been said already? I'll start with the performances of the cast because they are stellar. Everyone on screen has something to offer and leaves an impression on the audience. Morgan Freeman has more time to stand out with his presence alone. Bale also manages to grow into his character of Bruce Wayne, although one may argue that the role of Batman has taken a back seat in this film to allow the rest of the cast to shine. And of course, it should go without saying that Heath Ledger is simply top tier. His version of the Joker is genuinely terrifying and has this mysterious essence about him. I always loved the whole "wanna know where I got these scars" thing about him because it adds complexity to his character while also keeping the mystery by having each story be a load of bollocks. The more nonsense the better because the less we know about him makes his character that much more fascinating. I love how we don't really get an introduction to him either. He's just here now, wreaking havoc on Gotham, and that's that. I love how Nolan handled this character. Instead of making him this mindless psychopath, his mindset and decisions are calculated. He gives logical reasons why he does what he does, instead of doing it just because he can, and this depth makes you sort of resonate with the Joker in a weird way. But who I also wanted to shine light on was Aaron Eckhart, who really blew me away in this film. The subtle transformation he goes through before the end of the film is just so brilliant. He starts out as a man on top of the world, and then when he loses everything he loves, he loses his morals along with his mind, and it's just so fascinating and tragic to watch his character from beginning to end. Katie Holmes as Rachel Dawes is replaced by Maggie Gyllenhaal, who does a really great job in the role, and while I don't necessarily have a preference, I think Maggie Gyllenhaal smashed it. I think Shea Frillers put it best that you barely get a chance to breathe while watching this film. It's just pure chaos, but it doesn't tire you out. It hooks you the whole way through, with Joker cropping up every other scene with some new twisted antics. This isn't just a superhero film to me, it's a modern day classic. I don't think there will ever be another comic book movie as good as this movie, and that is a very bold claim that I am not hesitant to stand by. Truly one of the greatest films of all time. I knew this was going to be in the top 2 one way or another. Memento is my second favourite Nolan film, and the genius of it all is truly remarkable. For me, the most exciting aspect of this movie is how all the details gradually come together over the runtime. There are moments that initially seem trivial, but later prove to be crucial, showcasing Nolan's meticulous attention to detail and passion for his craft. As the film progresses, it carefully assembles the puzzle piece by piece, culminating in a shocking ending. Nolan's masterful use of non-linear narrative keeps you constantly guessing and creates a strong sense of satisfaction as the pieces start to click. Few movies engage an audience and demand as much attention as Memento, whether it's your first viewing or a rewatch. It stands out for its creative storytelling, and I firmly believe that Memento is one of the best movies ever made. I love how we receive every detail out of order, experiencing the story just as the main character, Leonard Shelby, does. At the beginning, everything feels random, but by the end, every detail is connected, leaving you in awe. Nolan ensures that every I is dotted and every T is crossed, demanding your full attention. This film represents Nolan at the peak of his powers, and is a must-watch for fans of unique storytelling. The fact that he went from The Following to this is so impressive, and I'm glad people saw Nolan's potential from that film to enable him to seamlessly cement his name in Hollywood and make himself and his genius mind known. The whole telling the story backwards gimmick, it doesn't even need to be included in the film, it's an added bonus to an already phenomenal experience. I mean seriously, how well developed must a story be to be able to tell it backwards? It was such a success of a movie and narrative that even Bollywood ripped it off in Gajni, which I actually watched quite a bit as a child. If that doesn't show the impact of a genius film like this, I don't know what will. I can't do this film justice, I really can't. I mean, just speaking about it now is making me want to rewatch it. Memento is a great movie with a great payoff, and I want Nolan to go down this direction again because his mind produces wonders when it does. Interstellar is easily my all-time favourite Christopher Nolan film, and probably my favourite film of all time, and I don't think anything will ever come close to beating it. On the surface, this is a movie about space and the possibilities of potentially inhabiting another planet. A really cool and digestible concept for everybody, and something a lot of people are intrigued in. And while yes, this movie is primarily set in space, really what the core of this film is love, and a relationship between a father and a daughter to be specific. Cooper, a former NASA pilot, is asked to fly across the universe to 3 planets to discover which is sustainable for human life, considering Earth is on its last legs, with this being set in the near future of our lifetime. He must save humanity, including his daughter, but in doing so has to make the sacrifice of leaving her behind. The cast is very, very powerful. Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway, Jessica Chastain, putting their all out there to create such an emotional and investing story. I might have been lying when I said that Dunkirk has the best cinematography in Nolan's filmography, because the cinematography in Interstellar is probably the greatest of all time. The shots back in Earth of an arid and famined world being completely contrasted by the gorgeous visuals of space. Visually, everything about it is astonishing, and these shots are actually breathtaking. Seriously, my biggest regret is not watching this in cinemas. There wasn't a single moment during this film where I thought, that wasn't very convincing. Instead, I kept thinking, did Nolan actually film this shit in space? Because let's be real, if there was a modern filmmaker to actually travel through space and wormholes to work on his latest films, it would be Christopher Nolan. What's even crazier is the country of India made history on the moon for less than half of the budget of Interstellar. That is just insane. And we can't not talk about that Zimmer score, because it is on a whole other level in this film. The use of the church organ provides such an ethereal and haunting atmosphere, perfectly matching the unknown essence of travelling through space. The core of this film are the characters, who during the nearly 3-hour runtime of this film are fully fleshed out, and you end up building a personal connection to each of them. A scene that particularly sticks out to me is when Cooper finds out that due to being on a planet that was in close proximity to a black hole, 23 years on Earth have passed, meaning his daughter, who he had last seen as a young child, had completely gone through her childhood and teen years, and he wasn't present for any of it. His silence is loud, and he proceeds to watch through the messages his children have left him when his life has gone by like that. This scene is so powerful and emotional, and it's kind of impossible to not cry during it, especially when that final message from his daughter plays. I said it before, but the acting in this film is absolutely astounding and just wrecks you. The ending where Cooper finally gets to see his daughter and they share a few moments together after Murph had pretty much waited a lifetime is just beautiful. I barely even scratched the surface with this film. There's so many other sequences that I can't even wrap my head around. Like when Cooper falls into the black hole and he enters the 4th dimension and is able to manipulate the dust grains in his home, which we saw at the beginning of the film, and he ends up sending the NASA site coordinates and ends up helping Murph by transmitting her information. Like, what is this? It all just works, and it doesn't even seem ridiculous because, similar to Inception, Nolan does it in such a way that makes you believe that everything in this film is within the realms of possibly happening, and Nolan banking on that feeling is precisely why this film works so well. I feel like I can just blabber on and on. Interstellar is truly a cinematic masterpiece, to put it lightly, and an experience that truly changes you every time you watch it, and that is just special. And with that said, that wraps up my ranking for every single Christopher Nolan film. To conclude, Christopher Nolan is responsible for some of my all-time favourite films, and it wouldn't even be extreme to say that some of his work has had such a large impact on my life and how I see certain things. His mind is not like many, and I'm so thankful that he's able to verbalize and jot down some of his crazy ideas in such a concise manner for everyone to enjoy. We don't have many directors like him out there, and that's what makes him so special, and I'm so glad that I've gotten the opportunity to sit here and express my love for his films. Thank you so much if you stuck around until the very end of this video. It took me a good while to make and formulate my thoughts, and I really appreciate the support I've been getting lately. If you have any thoughts regarding this ranking or have any other suggestions, please feel free to leave a comment down below, and I'll catch you all in the next one.